where you went because I'm blinded now. But what a joy it is to be introduced by a friend and someone that you deeply respect. So that's awesome.
Well, I mean, you've been through 3 years of Expo, and you've seen incredible life changes personally, and you've seen changes here. So, what are you up to these days?
So, yeah, it's interesting because I meet people from the last few Expos, and they're like, wait, you were in Ohio and then Detroit, and I showed a picture of my little boy last year. The progression was 18 months ago, I was with John S. and James L. Knight Foundation in Akron after having been in Detroit for, I think, 4 years. And I went down to Akron to do some problem solving for Knight, and my phone rang, and it was this guy named Dan Gilbert. And he said, hey, I need you to come back to Detroit. And I was like, I just left 6 months ago. And he's like, well, I have a basketball team. You want to come watch a basketball game with me? And I said, you have a basketball team? He's like, yeah, they're the Cavaliers. You should come watch a game with me. I was like, oh, okay. So you go and you watch a basketball game in an arena with the guy who owns the arena, and you're like, wow, this guy is playing at a scale different than I've ever seen before. And so we had a conversation. It ended up being like a trade. So I called my boss at night, and I talked to Dan, and then they talked, and now I guess I exercise my free agency. But now today I'm Chief Operating Officer for Rock Ventures. That's the helping company. I call it a helping company instead of a holding company that binds together Dan's investments, 28,000 people, 100 companies, 34 cities around the United States, and actually a couple international cities. But really the emphasis is on two places. We say we're Lake Erie centric, so Detroit and Cleveland is really where our heart is.
I mean, there's been incredible change up there, and you've gone through this incredible change too. One of the times you were here before, you talked about falling in love with your problems and not with your solutions. Are you still in love with those same problems you were with?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think the people, the folks I've known my whole life. So I started in grassroots, organizing and development. I raised money with the United Way. I've sort of progressed through, all of the different angles on community change. And so people were like, "Well, did you sell out? Did you just go make some money now to pay for your kid? And are you ever going to come back to community work?" And I'm like, no, I'm still incredibly in love with the same problems that I've been thinking about for all these years, which is what is great community? How do you make great community that from the user experience side, no matter what your resources are, that you're able to maximize your individual potential, and that the potential of those around you is able to be maximized. And so big business is not typically thought of as a vehicle for doing that. It's sort of like you've got capitalism over here and philanthropy over here, and you make a choice. I gravitated to Dan in Detroit because they're trying to do both at the same time.
Do you find yourself with conflicted values around you, or?
I think we're fortunate. So what I'm seeing, and the thing that I wasn't able to bring, the last 2 years I was able to bring a fully shaped presentation that, I know the pictures I want to put with it. I know exactly what I want to say. And I reached out and said, no, I think we need to have a fireside conversation because I don't exactly know all of the words on this yet. I'm still talking through it. So you guys are seeing that happening. But I think there is and I won't call it new. I think there's an old form of capitalism that was known as for more than profit that we're rediscovering. And so what I mean by for more than profit is that you can find these intersections of moral imperative and market imperative, and that if you intersect those two things, you can both make money that gives you an ability to do more of it, and you can answer some of the conditions that you are most concerned about. So for example, one of the things I'm most concerned about in Detroit is jobs for folks that have been there their whole lives and that can't find access to opportunity. I was digging around. I got to Dan's company. Digging around. I looked at, he moved the company inside the city 6 years ago. I started building big data. That was my first 6 months, was just building big data operations. And what I found was when he moved into the company, he had 71 people who lived inside the city limits. And today we have 3,800 who live inside the city limits. And 1,800 of those people are lifelong Detroiters. So those are folks who are most in need of economic opportunity. And now what we're doing is figuring out how those folks got into the mix and trying to turn the company or the family of companies into an intentional inclusion machine. So now it gets to go, I've worked like entrepreneur to entrepreneur one at a time, helped start a coffee shop, helped start, and all this is important. This is a great space that we're sitting in right now. But you also have to figure out some ambitions of scale. And so employing folks, even in low-margin companies, may be better philanthropy than just writing checks to social services, which has spun my head. I mean, it's kind of taken 20 years of my career and spun it all the way around.
So it sounds like, in some ways, that you talk about not having the language for this. We all have these different vocabularies. Do you find that it's hard to sometimes communicate your vocabulary with those that have been working in this business world forever? Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I look at through the lens of a entrepreneur, community organizer, and I got these guys talking to me about what our IRR is going to be. The whole collection, the sort of acronym, stuff that they throw at you that you're like, I don't know. And so I say things to them like, intersection of moral imperative and market imperative, and they're like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I think, and this is another reason I love to come to Roanoke is being a Southerner and sort of being a hill person. Like I grew up in the mountains of North Georgia. And I grew up around people of widely different means, backgrounds. And for all of us to communicate well together, I think we simplified our communication structures. And so I think that's why I grasp for things like for more than profit, like a way to encapsulate conceptually. Yeah, it's good, guys. Being capitalist is good, but you can do more than that at the same time if you're thoughtful. But I think the vocabulary vernacular that goes along with it. And you see this happen, right, in popular culture. Malcolm Gladwell goes out and writes a book that has this concept of tipping point in it. And now I hear people say tipping point like 19 times a week. It's helpful in our evolution of community work. And I have to imagine with that kind of scale that you guys are working with, that in addition to changing the language that you talk with, as well as trying to change the language that everyone talks with, that the structure of your theory or whatever has changed. 2 years ago, you famously put your steps up on the board, and everyone's like, I got to get these steps right now. Have those steps changed in your mind? No,
they actually, the cool thing is we own a company called Fathead, which does wall graphics. So now the steps are on my wall like in much big. so the steps are just 8 by 8 now instead of the 8.5 by 11 that I used to have. But no, the method doesn't change. The interesting thing is a lot of my colleagues who have been in the for-profit world for their whole lives are like, well, do you think in a very different, weird way, which is very helpful to us. And so I'm seeing a need for cross-sector intersections. I think the old line progression, especially for the hyper-capitalist, was kind of go to business school, go out, make your money, and then try to do a little good in the world. And maybe there's an inversion of that. Maybe you need to learn how community actually works, how people actually work, how to make things happen without resources, so that when you add resources into the mix, that you're much more thoughtful about both your intended consequences and your unintended consequences.
That thoughtfulness for me is huge. And I wonder, on our way in from the airport last night, you talked about trying to still learn all the time. And I wonder, with this incredibly fast-paced thing that you do and all these changes that you've been through, how do you find time to reflect and look back and try and figure out what you've learned through these periods?
I may have mentioned it to you, and I think I mentioned it to Ed this morning. So, I don't know, I had this sort of, I used to say that I had irrational fears, and then somebody told me that all fears are pretty rational. But I have this irrational belief that that I was, until I turned 40, that I'm in school. That whatever I was doing, I'm in school. And so I got 18 months until I turn 40. And so like now I'm in my PhD. And so, but why I say that is it's like an outlook. So if I think I've been able to become a lifelong learner because my outlook is I am in education mode. And some of the things I have to do in my job are not fun. I am the resident. I think if you talk to my colleagues, and on some days I'm the angel of death. I take people out of the company just as well as I welcome new people into the company. So there's certainly things that I don't love doing, but I learn a ton from doing that. And when you have to take people out, you do so with empathy. When you bring people in, you do it with an inclination to disrupting the reality that exists right now. I think that it's all your framework. It's if you're looking at your life as an exploration of education, one, it makes it all much more tolerable. I put up with a lot more bullshit because I'm like, well, this is school, and PhDs aren't supposed to be easy. But it also leaves me open to justifying, spending 2 days away from a really crazy environment because I'm going to learn things from all of you guys that are going to make the work much better when I get home to Detroit.
Are you able to find time to still live in those past environments that you've been in those foundation places and in those grassroots places?
Yeah, it's really in two ways. One, it's great to go home and see how the work moves and molds. And the coolest thing happened. I had this guy come to Detroit to present his family's fifth-generation insurance company, and he's like, I want to create Rocket Insurance. You guys have probably seen the Rocket mortgage commercials, and he was fifth-generation insurance company. He's like, I see what you guys are doing. You're putting it all online. You're making it technology-driven. I want to do that with my family's company, and so I'm helping him work through that. And then the other night, he sent me an email, and he's like, I had no idea you were the guy. He's like, my family's company also teaches these classes, these co-starter classes, and they're in a rural town in southern Indiana. He's like, I had no idea you were the guy that was behind that. And so you see the growth and development of things that you've had your hands in the past that then manifest in ways that you never expected to encounter them. But then there's also more the rooting in who you are. There's the more internal side, and I very much feel like the guy who was sitting in a town who got pissed off because it didn't seem like it was going in the right direction, and that all I'm doing is it's like athletics. I started out as an amateur, and I'm getting closer to being able to play in the pros, but I still play the same sport.
I'm really intrigued about how you look at these projects that you were involved in the past, and how you can look at them and hand them off to other people and let them thrive in other hands, and how you look back on that and how you view your success looking back like that.
Yeah, so I have tremendous admiration for what Amy and Ed and team did here in handing off the reins, and I've done that many times in the last 20 years. And the first few times you do it, it's very much an acquired taste because half of accomplishing a lot is being a total control freak, and so it's counterintuitive to get to a place where you're like, okay, I built something, I love this, I love the problem, we built an elegant solution, and now it's time to hand it off. The long arc, I will tell you, is the single greatest joy by far in this entire career. Yes, we've built stuff. It manifests even more in Detroit because there's so many buildings and there's so much. You see the restaurateur go in, you see the park change, but by far the greatest joy in all of this work is what I call my kids. And so, at the time we started all this, we were not that far different in age. Now it's getting to a place where the interns that I hire, we do have a bit of age difference. But I've got 250 people in this world that I call my kids, who I've helped them start their work, who I've given my work to, who I've helped intersect with new work. And, I'd say once a week, one of those calls comes in, and it's either it's a call or a text. I got one last week, and it was 3 of my kids from different worlds who had gotten together in New York, and I just got the, thinking of you, and each one of them's gone on to do really, really amazing things. and I was actually, that entire idea for me came from Samuel Mockbee, who was a professor at Auburn University, the Rural Design Studio. And he was a bit of a character, died way too early. But they said that the students who worked with him, the documentary about his life, they ended up naming it Citizen Architect, but the documentarian really wanted to name it Snakebit. And they wanted to name it Snakebit because he said once you had done the work the way that Samuel had figured out to do it with the kids, that afterward they were snakebitten. They were never the same again. So being able to be party to, and not really a teacher, but a learner with these great human beings who I then get to go on and watch do far more amazing stuff than I do, that turns out to be by far the great joy of all of this.
Well, very good. Unfortunately, our time is gone.
It's good. Always good to be here, Brad.
Conversation is such an important part of Expo, I think, and for you to be willing to open yourself up and not know at all what I was going to ask you, and so I think that just speaks to the Expo spirit. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you.